Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. I'm Ryan from the Figma design team.
I'm Joel, product designer on the design team.
Hi, Casey, product manager here at Figma.
And today we're so excited to give you a behind-the-scenes look at UI3. Before we get started, though, I want to go a little bit back in time. Figma launched almost a decade ago now, and we've kept a remarkably consistent layout over the years. Doesn't that look pretty familiar? This isn't by accident. Even as we've added lots of functionality, this was before components, auto layout, dev mode, variables, and so much more. We've tried to keep things in the same place as much as possible to avoid breaking your muscle memory. But as we look to the future, if we only keep adding new features, what once felt really simple will gradually start to feel more complex and intimidating. We think it's really important to carve out time every so often to take a step back and really prioritize what's most important in the interface. That's why we can't wait for you to try the next major step in Figma's evolution, really bringing focus to your work and organizing the interface for the future. Today, we'd love to share some of the insights and principles that shaped this work, the iterations we went through to create a more focused canvas, a much closer look at our properties panel, and finally, some reflections and learnings from this project. So first, some principles. When we look back at the last 10 years, the way we design has actually really evolved. We're no longer just drawing simple rectangles with colors, but working with powerful concepts like components that have rich properties built right in. We want to highlight these right at the top so that the properties you and your team have spent time creating get the prominence they deserve. We've baked in a wide range of usability improvements like these across the system, from working with auto layout to getting started with templates, to really improve workflows we all go through hundreds of times a day. Second, we believe the design tool of the future will place a lot more focus on your ideas rather than our UI. All the tools and controls you expect will still be there, but we're making it possible to further minimize our UI so you can really stretch out and make use of your entire screen. This works really well with a powerful new set of actions we're introducing, powered by AI, that can help automate grunt work, like naming layers, filling in sample content, or even wiring up your prototype, so you can really focus on your idea. Finally, as we introduce slides, we want to make sure we're building a family of apps that are designed to work together. This means you can take your mocks and interactive prototypes from Figma Design and easily create a beautiful deck using a very familiar, consistent layout. Of course, we've included all the tools you need to create a great deck, but for designers, we've included a special new toggle that turns on design mode. This feels like a superpower that adds a whole new dimension to Figma slides. This instantly brings in your familiar layer list and properties from the design tool, so you can really dial things in just the way you want without disturbing anyone you're working with. This combination of core usability improvements based on how we all work today, a really deep sense of focus and immersion in the canvas, and interoperability with new products really add up to the best editing experience we've ever shipped for designers. And we think will set an exciting foundation for the years to come. One really challenging aspect of this project was organizing our information architecture so that we can really defer to the canvas. One problem we immediately had was figuring out how to handle controls that lived at the top of the view, like our file actions and contextual actions. We actually had this problem in our old design where, because we had limited space, we could only show one of these at a time, which meant that sometimes controls you were looking for could be hidden, while others were far away from where your next step might be. We found it really helpful to move these contextual actions into the property panel, where they live alongside all the other actions you can take on a given object. We really like how this works as a system, because it gives your eye one place to look to be able to find all the things you can do to a given object. Similarly, we moved file and project name into the left sidebar. This allows us to have persistent controls and creates a nice linear hierarchy where you can always understand what file you're looking at, where it lives, and what's inside. Finally, we moved our tools to the bottom of the view. Because our eyes read from top to bottom, This allows your eyes to really focus on the work that can now go to the very top edge of the screen. We've also given it a lighter fill, so it blends in more with the canvas. Rather than taking up the full width of the view, we've made use of this floating style that allows us to really cinch things in and only occupy the space we need, so you have more working space back on the canvas. Of course, there were so many ideas we cut along the way. Throughout the process, as a team, we often found ourselves trying to do the hard thing first, starting from a point of view and working backwards. This really helped us understand constraints and make sure we're pushing the product forward in a responsible way. One of those was with a feature we're calling Minimize UI. From the very beginning of this project, we had this vision of getting the editor to be as close as possible to being just your work. But we imagined a future where properties could be condensed and brought contextually next to your cursor, where it would be even closer to where you were working. But one challenge was figuring out the specifics around positioning. We wanted to position this as close as possible to your cursor without covering the thing you were trying to select. We explored lots of iterations of heuristics here. But this really lacked stability, and as we played with it, we felt like it made it difficult to anticipate where your controls would appear next. We explored hundreds of different prototypes, from control styles to heuristics. And we actually built many of these and used them ourselves in real builds within the design team for our day-to-day work. We've tested these for months. But we found ourselves really craving stability by default. And so in the version we're shipping today, when you go into a new file, you'll see both sidebars by default with all the controls you expect. When you want to focus, you can click this icon to minimize our UI or use a shortcut, and you'll feel really immersed in the canvas. And then when you select something and go to edit, we'll show you the full height sidebar with properties and get it out of the way the minute you no longer need it. We think this strikes the right balance where it helps achieve our goals of really allowing the interface to get out of the way while still remaining rock solid and predictable for a tool you use every single day. This project goes way deeper than what first meets the eye. One of the most complex parts of our product is our property panel. And to tell you more about it, here's Joel.
Thanks, Ryan. Hi, everyone. How are you all feeling? Good? Awesome. So we've made a lot of changes to our properties panel, and today I'm going to talk you through the usability improvements that we've made, focusing in these three areas. So let's get started with clarity. So over time, we've heard a lot about Figma's UI feeling pretty unclear when it comes to affordances. If you look at the panel, it's pretty hard to distinguish an input from a drop-down to a button. And a lot of the controls that we have in the panel are really unique to Figma. So if you're not familiar with the iconography, it can feel pretty intimidating and unapproachable. And just to add to the confusion, when you're working with styles, we do things like hide the panel headers. So it can be pretty difficult to tell these controls apart if you're not looking closely. Well, in UI3, we've made a lot of improvements to try and add more clarity to the properties panel. So we've moved away from the minimal treatment of the past and added much more transparent affordances. And we've softened the corner radius so that it just feels a bit more modern and approachable. And to help Figma feel more accessible, we've added a new ability to see labels above controls. And this is a view setting that you can turn on or off via the settings menu in the top right. And it just makes the panel a lot easier to navigate, especially when learning the new IA. And we've also made the panel feel much more stable by default. So when you're working with styles, you'll now see the panel headers. It's a small change, but it's a nice improvement. So next up are some changes that we've made to component panels. As Ryan mentioned earlier, the way that we've worked has now evolved. We're really working with components instead of rectangles. And these components have become really, really complex over the years because we've added more capabilities to design system features. But if you look at the panel, it's not really optimized for this, or that complexity. In fact, we often run into issues where the labels truncate quite often. So in UI3, we've reprioritized it so that components are at the forefront. And now you'll see them at the top of the panel with the component name and component actions. And perhaps the best feature, or my favorite feature, is that you can now resize the panel so that you no longer have that truncation issue. and you can see more of the component labels and the component description. Now, components can get pretty complex, and sometimes you can have so many properties that it takes up the whole height of the panel. And one thing that we explored was trying to collapse these so that you could still access other controls below, so you wouldn't have to scroll so often. When we tried this out in the customer beta, and we found that actually it didn't really work very well. So we got a lot of feedback saying it was kind of frustrating to use, it was a little bit annoying, and so we just backtracked it, and we've made sure that all of the top-level component properties are visible by default, so that even if you have to scroll, you can still see them all. So the final improvements I want to focus on today are some changes that we've made to use layout properties. Now, being a designer on the editor team, layout is something that I think about a lot. And one of the first projects that I worked on at Figma was some changes to auto layout. So hands up, who remembers auto layout when it looked like this? OK, quite a few people. Nice. Well, one thing that we found with this feature was that the resizing UI was quite confusing. And we made this change to move these controls to be drop-downs, placing them much closer to dimension properties. And our theory was that by moving these closer to dimension properties, you would get a better understanding of how it relates to resizing. How dimensions and resizing relate to each other. And one thing that kind of bugged me over the years is that we've never really solved this problem of making a stronger connection between the dimension properties at the top and auto layout panel below. They're all kind of far apart from each other. And if you look closer at the properties panel, you actually notice this in other areas too. So if you're working with text layers, you might have noticed that width and height are disabled. And the reason for that is because there's this tiny control in the text panel that's really far down that actually controls these inputs that are much higher up. So if you don't know that, you can have a pretty hard time trying to do layout with text layers. And actually, an even harder time with text styles because it's even more hidden. But wait, there's also more. So did you know that alignment, position, and constraints are all related? In fact, you might not know, but if you change the alignment of a layer, it also updates the constraints. But we don't really do much to show that all these properties are connected. So with UI3, we've made some improvements to try and build stronger connections and make this much easier to understand. And we started off by exploring the concept of a layout panel. So this had all of the layout properties merged together in one big panel. And we explored different variations of this with different layouts and different controls, some moving far away from what we have today and some much closer. And within this, we also knew that we had to try and condense some height as well, because this panel is pretty big. So one of the explorations that we tried was this idea of an alignment grid pop-out control. So when you click on a button, it would open up underneath your cursor, and then it would reposition itself. And it looked really cool in a prototype, but when you build it and actually test it, you realize that it's a little bit unpredictable. And just harking back to that point that Ryan made before, we kind of want to prioritize stability by default. So we shifted away from this and instead just grouped all of the controls that are related together in separate panels focused on position and layout. Now, this is a pretty controversial change because it's a big departure from what we have today, and it breaks with muscle memory. So it's going to be in a bit of adjustment. And we were kind of worried about this change, but we realized that we have to try the hard thing. It's really necessary to do this if we're actually going to make impactful usability changes. So let me walk through those changes that we've made. So first of all, we've grouped all the position-related properties together. So we've moved alignment controls, we've placed those above X and Y, and we've added new rotation controls, so it's a lot easier to flip or rotate a layer. And we've moved constraints as well into closer proximity with X and Y. So it really helps you to understand how all these controls are related. We've also created a new layout panel, which merges dimensions with auto layout. So you'll see that there's actually no more separate auto layout section. Instead, there is now a toggle button which transforms the layout panel into the auto layout panel. And doing this allows us to have the added advantage of merging dimensions and resize modes together. So now you understand exactly how those relate with auto layout. And it gives you more of a responsive mindset and actually more closely aligns to how things are built in code. Now, one thing we tried when we tested this out in the customer beta, we got some feedback on this, and we found that we were actually missing some really core designer workflows. You know, being designers, they want to be pixel perfect, and they actually like to check the pixel values, even if something's set to fill or hug. So learning this helped us to make even further improvements. So now you can see small details like the pixel values when you have a resize mode set on a layer when clicking on canvas. And you can also see them when you're hovering on controls, and my favorite feature, resizing the panel as well. We've also fixed that text resizing issue. So we've moved the segmented control underneath width and height, so it's just way easier to work with text layers. Now, if you look back, this is some of the most significant changes that we've ever made to our properties panel. And there is going to be an adjustment period. Muscle memory is going to have to be relearned. But I really hope that this demonstrates that we've tried to take a really thoughtful approach to making usability improvements, but also prioritizing stability and honoring muscle memory. The properties and the canvas are just two of the challenging areas that we've had to face during this project. And to talk more about the challenges that we've faced as a team is Casey. Thanks, everyone.
Nice. Hi, everyone. My name's Casey. I'm a product manager here at Figma. This is easily the hardest product I've ever worked on. It's incredibly challenging, and there's a very demanding audience that holds a high bar for quality. Today I want to share with you some of the reflections we've had over the last 12 months in building this new interface. Figma is a really unique tool in that it's this free-form design tool that gives you the ability to turn your ideas and imagination, explore those ideas, and express them within a creative tool. But also, like we've been talking about, it's a tool for design systems to give you components that act as building blocks to help turn your ideas into working products. And the challenge at Figma is making space for both of these things at the same time. In my opinion, this is one of Figma's superpowers, is how it can make space for both of these things equally in the same product. And while designing UI3, we've even thought about how can the structured aspects influence the freeform aspects, like making components more playful, putting them to the top so they feel like building blocks you can play with and explore, and also improving the affordances in the freeform tool to improve the structure and clarity. Another really challenging balancing act is how do we uphold the history of design tools and honor the motor memory that all of you have built up over many years? I know a lot about shortcuts, and if you move those around, it can really hurt. But as technology evolves, our tools also need to evolve. And so with breakthroughs like AI, we need to progress into the new and unfamiliar. And this is another tricky balancing act to figure out how do we sit in the past and the future. And if you move too slowly, you risk being left behind and missing out on new capabilities and new tools to help us build greater things. But if you move too quickly, you risk leaving our communities behind. And these are just two examples of some of the challenges we faced while building products at Figma. And it's become apparent to me working on this over the last year that these aren't two things that are at odds with each other, but rather the important thing is to step back and realize they're intertwined, and it's one thing you're handling together, and to see them as a whole and how they influence each other. And so looking back, one of the first things I want to reflect on is the need for balance and finding the right balance in everything you're doing. And finding that right perspective. And the team is all over the place. So we had Tim in Belgium, Joel was in London for a little bit, Ryan was in San Francisco, I'm based in New York. And so there were a lot of Fig Jams over the last 12 months where we needed to figure out what exactly it was we were doing. And they had interesting shapes that emerged unintentionally. Sometimes we would have conversations that were very grounding to help us understand, like, what do we need to do? Other conversations kind of literally went up and helped us see what was possible and paint a picture of the future. We also needed to understand, what does good look like? What exactly are we solving for? And we also did hundreds of design explorations. And so our entire design team put together looking at the entirety of the design editor to understand, how do we update this for UI3? And also, there were a lot of icons, I think hundreds of icons. Shout out to Tim Van Dam, who's, I think, watching at home right now, for his work across the product. And also for those of you interested in more behind the scenes on craft, online today, Stanley and Wayne will be giving a talk on collaborative precision. But not only was it important to do the work, but we had to talk about the work and make sure we were all on the same page. And so we needed crit formats to make sure all the designers knew what was going on, that we get everyone's feedback. We also need to understand what exactly it was we were building, what's in scope, what's not in scope. And for a project like this, we needed to put together high-level pictures that communicated quickly but effectively. Here's all the things that we're doing. And it was really important as a team to make space to reflect along the way on the various milestones and take time to celebrate while also looking forward to what's next. And the journey was really messy. We hit a lot of dead ends in this journey. There were points we didn't think we would figure things out or know how we would land things. But looking back, the most important thing we did for ourselves was to give ourselves as much space as possible. Sometimes it took weeks for us to feel out some of these changes like Joel and Ryan were describing. And since they're not these snap judgments, we needed to give ourselves some runway to figure out the answers. And so looking back, the second theme that emerged is making sure we maximize and make as much space for ourselves as possible to give us the best chance of finding something really great. And here you've heard this from Ryan and Joel. It's been a theme for us working on this, and that's to try the hard thing. We found that the most interesting aspects of the redesign were hidden by the most scary and daunting challenges. Like how do we redesign Figma to put components and auto layout first if we had those and we're building around them? How do we reorient all of the tools to put your content first and really immerse you in the infinite canvas? And in a lot of redesign stories, this would be the end, where we'd walk off stage and say thank you very much. But we know that change takes time. And the last thing I think any of us want is getting the new design 30 minutes before a product review and needing to figure out how everything works. And so we're going to roll this out slowly. So you can sign up for the waitlist today if you log into your account. There's a button if you're interested in getting access. We're going to be releasing this to all of you in the coming weeks. But we're releasing this as a beta, and we really want to hear from you. While today we've heard a lot of stories about how feedback has shaped and influenced the product, we know we're not done. That feedback throughout this process from Figmates, our beta testers, has been invaluable. And many of you know that feedback is like oxygen to the product process, and it's a necessary component for building great things. And looking back, the easiest way for us to define success was to figure out how do we build something that's undeniably great for designers. And so the bar we set for ourselves is how do we build the best editing experience for designers? And to do that, we need your help. So we're going to be at the research tank downstairs later today from 12:45 to 1:45. We'd love to talk to you today and tomorrow. If you have questions or thoughts about the redesign, we'll also be wandering around the conference hall. Please say hi. We'd love to talk to you and hear your thoughts. Also, for those of you watching at home or after the conference, please reach out to us online. We're really proud of what we built, and today we're really glad to share these stories of how we built UI3. But I'm really excited for the next chapter involving all of you, where we build UI3 together. So thank you very much.